Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. I have a great guest coming on. I have Tristan Leavitt from Empower Oversight. Tristan, welcome to the program. How are you today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I mean, obviously, we got a lot of news breaking out there, but before I get to, the corruption within the Biden administration, I first want to talk to you about Empower Oversight because I think it's such an important organization. Can you explain to the audience what Empower Oversight does?
Absolutely. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're created for the purpose of just being able to help get information out to the public about how our government operates. And usually that's through whistleblowers. So whistleblowers bringing waste, fraud, and abuse to light and helping to take the information that they bring and get it to decision makers who can do something about it. So both my background and that of Empower's founder, Jason Foster, was in congressional investigations. He and I worked together for Senator Chuck Grassley on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Our first investigation together was into ATF's Operation Fast and Furious some 13 years ago. And after that led other investigations. I led the Hillary Clinton server investigation for the House Oversight Committee. He led a lot of the Trump-Russia investigation, pushing back, understanding the background behind the Carter Page FISA and other things like that. And so we came together on Empower to be able to, again, help whistleblowers who would like to come forward with information from inside of the government, but aren't sure how to do it and aren't sure, they want to make sure that if they come forward and risk retaliation, that it gets to the right people, that changes are made and that the public learns what they need to learn. So that's what we specialize in, getting information to Congress and to the public in a way that it can make a difference.
And it's so important because when we look at the bureaucracy, the whole idea of public service is that they are servants to the public. But it seems in this day and age that many of those within the bureaucracy believe that we exist almost to serve them and that they could do whatever they want as long as they defend it as in defense of democracy, right? They believe that they're self-anointed guardians of democracy. How bad is the corruption from your point of view within the bureaucracy itself? And I'm not talking about, the Democrats or Republicans that are appointed to positions that are politicians. I'm talking about the bureaucracy itself and the lifetime bureaucrats that work there. How much worse has the situation gotten?
Well, there's a lot of crosswinds there. I mean, I will start by saying there are a lot of good people in government, right? A lot of people are attracted to work for the government, and all across the country, right? People work for various agencies in every state in the country. A couple of the biggest challenges, though, over the past few decades are that so much power has been consolidated in Washington, D.C. And of course, that's where these agency headquarters are almost universally. And so there's a mindset that drives so many of these agencies that just isn't in sync with your average everyday American. I moved a couple of years ago to Charleston, West Virginia. And, the perspective of everyday folks here in terms of just, paying bills and getting food on the table, and in terms of what they see as the importance of, their freedoms, as their rights, is just an entirely different view from when we lived in the Washington, D.C. area for quite a while. So that's a big piece of it. Another piece of it is that these bureaucracies were created for so many different purposes that they just have this perpetuating life of their own. So they're untethered really from what Congress wants. We've seen some Supreme Court decisions this last year that will change some of that, and in fact, a couple in the last couple of years that can have an impact there. But so even with some good people that are there in government, I think you have a combination of the difficulties in firing bad employees. You have just systems that perpetuate seeking after certain interests while not taking into account the broader public interest. And I think that creates a lot of major problems for how we govern our country.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about a couple of the good bureaucrats in a few minutes. But before I get to them, I want to ask you, when you have a lot of experience, I mean, from your time on Capitol Hill to your work at Empower Oversight, And that experience, I think, is critical. But one of the things that's disappointed me over the years is that Congress doesn't really exercise its power of oversight the way it actually could to start to rein in the out of control bureaucracies that, let's face it, in a lot of cases have completely disregarded Congress. I mean, you brought up Fast and Furious that you worked on, where the Attorney General, Eric Holder, just completely ignored congressional demands and subpoenas for information. Are you disappointed that Congress isn't more forceful when it comes to oversight?
I would certainly like to see more forcefulness with oversight. One of the real ironies of Operation Fast and Furious is that it set off somewhat of a chain reaction. And the upshot of that, there were these subpoenas. Those were issued by Chairman Darrell Issa on the House Oversight Committee, which was where I moved to that committee from Senator Grassley's office. Those demands for information came. There certainly have been inter-branch squabbles before, right, where one branch is fighting over another. So that's the whole point of congressional oversight, is doing oversight of the executive branch. But to have held Eric Holder in contempt and still not get anywhere initially, eventually we did get the documents, and I wrote a report in 2017. It was at the beginning of the Trump administration, before I led a couple of agencies during the Trump administration. But writing on the documents that we tried to get, but even that we had to pare down from the initial requests. But I think what that really showed was you can flout a subpoena from Congress, right? And there isn't a lot of great enforcement authority. And so you've had some discussions in the last year that, for me was kind of nerd talk a few years ago about, okay, what are the inherent means that Congress has to enforce their subpoenas, right? Why they shouldn't have to rely on courts or on the executive branch. How do you do this? How does our Constitution operate in a way that doesn't require, where the first branch of government established in Article 1 of the Constitution can fulfill its responsibilities without relying on the other branches. So Congress could be more assertive and should be more assertive. A couple of the factors that I think are make it less likely that they will be in the near future is that Congress is not staffed in any large way. And in fact, Congress is kind of a, look at us, we're doing something measure over the last, I guess 30 years, really, since 1994, right? Newt Gingrich comes in, they say we're going to make these changes. Let's start by cutting our budgets. We're going to show everybody, right? We're going to cut these committee budgets. And so you end up in a scenario where the experts on some of these issues, they're in the executive branch. They're not in Congress. So Congress can do certain amounts of oversight. But at the end of the day, right now, Congress really relies on the executive branch to get a lot of its knowledge and information in a way that ideally it shouldn't. They really should staff up a lot more. And in doing that would maybe be in a better position to conduct oversight of some of these issues. The other thing, I kind of jumped over an issue, but to circle back to that point of how do you enforce the subpoenas, there's just a lot of fear in Congress that, well, if we really push, if we really go to the mat on some of these issues, courts are not going to allow us to enforce these, and then we will truly be the emperor with no clothes, right? And so there's a fear of that. And that could be right. My answer to that would be to say, well, push it. If you have to push it, appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. But what if they lose? What if Congress says, well, or what the Supreme Court says, yes, under these circumstances, you can enforce these subpoenas, but under other circumstances, maybe you're not entitled to that. And so we kind of operate with this fiction that Congress has all this authority, but it's built on some premises that, maybe need to be tested more. So I think that drives some of the fear there. I'll add one other thing quickly, which is there is one of the things that's frustrating to me is that there is some hypocrisy there in saying, well, if we allow Congress to really conduct this thorough of oversight on them, they're going to do it if we control the White House, they being different political parties, and another party controls Congress. And so there are some that I've come across who just, at the end of the day, are kind of okay with the way things are, because if Republicans are in control of the White House, they say, well, we don't want Congress to be able to do that thorough oversight on us. And so I think it's a mistake from an overall constitutional perspective that, yes, we have multiple parties, but at the end of the day, they're different branches for a reason. And for the separation of powers to truly work, for those checks and balances, you've got to not hobble them, which is what we've seen happening over the last few decades.
Absolutely. And you're supposed to represent your institution, not necessarily your political will. And I think you're right. I think a lot of them do like the status quo. It's clear. Another problem is that they're always chasing the next shiny object. So when they start digging into something, something else will pop up, and then they'll tend to ignore the original problems. But we do see selective enforcement, right? You have Eric Holder that wasn't prosecuted, Lois Lerner found in contempt wasn't prosecuted, but those on Trump's team, they were. You know, the Steve Bannons, the Peter Navarros were prosecuted, and the Justice Department did go after them. And I would argue that, you know, rather than cut the congressional budget, cut some of these agencies' budgets. They routinely show how they constantly abuse power, but there are some good bureaucrats that do exist. And I do want to bring two of them up because they work with Empower Oversight. You have IRS whistleblower Gary Shapley and Special Agent Joe Ziegler, both great guys. You know, you and I have spoken before. These are two individuals that understand what public service is about. And so, can you just explain to the audience the curious case of Hunter Biden and the Biden family business?
Sure. I was just talking to someone actually about a broader way to tell this story, and it's a big story, right? But so the most people know, right? Most people are familiar, I'm sure, with some of what's out there on the Hunter laptop and other things like that. And the obvious thumbnail there is that dating back to Joe Biden's vice presidency under President Obama, Hunter Biden quickly got in. He had gone from really, a lobbyist and before that an attorney that, wasn't all that successful, but he capitalized on his dad's name. And it appears quite with a lot of help from his dad himself, right? Here are the trips we're going to be taking. We're going to China. You come right along. You go meet with these officials. And so Hunter Biden was really able to make, cottage industry out of that, making very large amounts of money, capitalizing on the Biden family name, along with Joe Biden's brother. And again, certainly with the knowledge of Joe Biden, it appears, if not with his involvement in various stages. A lot of that wasn't in the public eye. So Peter Schweitzer wrote a book a few years ago. I think it preceded the Hunter Biden laptop, right? But highlighting some of these, some of the ways that the Biden family had enriched themselves. And then the Biden laptop kind of burst into the public consciousness in October of 2020. But a year earlier, that laptop had been obtained by the FBI, and it was obtained by the FBI because of an IRS warrant or an IRS subpoena because the IRS had opened a tax investigation into Hunter Biden. So at a certain point in approximately 2018, they became aware of potential, there's some red flags surrounding Hunter Biden's conduct. And so Joe Ziegler, a self-described progressive Democrat, he opened that case. And in opening it, started to look further into Hunter Biden's finances. And along the way, they became notified of the laptop that Hunter Biden had left at a computer repair shop in Delaware. And so it was on their legal grounds that was obtained. The FBI verified it and authenticated it. And that was a whole year before the New York Post broke the story of the Hunter Biden laptop that was so quickly suppressed. So these guys were inside the IRS. Gary Shapley was Joe's supervisor. So Gary's a supervisory special agent. And obviously they knew this was real, but they are bound by tax secrecy laws. They couldn't speak out. And so they just kind of sat by in frustration as the public, really was told, well, this is all just a lie. It's a Russian disinformation operation. And so from there, they really did their best working within the system to try to move things forward. They moved forward the Hunter Biden tax investigation, even though there were obstacles like in December. Initially, they were told you can't go overt with your investigation, so you can't confront Hunter Biden or anyone else until after the 2020 election. And this started. They were told that even as Joe Biden was just barely entering the primaries in the spring of 2020. So they were pushed back and pushed back. Finally, in December of 2020, they go overt. And the night before they're supposed to, go and confront Hunter and do raids on several other places, he's tipped off by the Secret Service. And so you just had a number of things like that where Hunter Biden benefited again and again. Eventually, the IRS makes its case together with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Delaware. And then come 2022, they are in a position where they are getting ready over the course of the next year to try and prosecute these cases. So all these charges recommended by the IRS, even though the IRS was held back from investigating Joe Biden, they were not allowed to ask questions about him in key interviews. But still, they end up in this place where DOJ says, okay, here's the charges on Hunter Biden. We at least agree with these. Again, that's leaving aside the stuff that they weren't able to look at. But when it came down to it, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware didn't have the authority to charge in the places where they needed to. So the key tax years were 2014 and 2015 in the District of Columbia. And then at the end of the Obama administration, Hunter Biden moved to California. And so from then on, it's these California was the venue where the tax charges had to be brought. And again, the IRS had identified felonies for each of those years, willful evasion of the taxes. Hunter Biden lied on tax return forms, even when he was sober, according to his own memoirs. And so they have these charges, but the U.S. attorneys in California and in D.C., both appointed by Joe Biden, rejected the case and said, well, we don't want to bring it. And U.S. Attorney David Weiss didn't have the authority in Delaware to do it on his own. And so that learning that from David Weiss was really what Gary Shapley has called his red line moment. The time he realized we've worked through the system all along. You held us back in all these ways, but now you're telling us this case is going to die. The DC charges, you're going to just allow the statute of limitations to expire because the DC U.S. attorney isn't interested in this case. And that goes to the conflicts of interest with Eric Holder. The DC U.S. attorney chose not to bring, to convene a grand jury for that contempt referral. And so in that case, that's when Gary Shapley decided to come forward. So we worked with him from the outset. He went to a lawyer that he already knew that had been in the Justice Department, Mark Lytle. Mark said, I don't know anything about going to Congress or about whistleblower protections. So he came to Empower Oversight, and we helped Gary to prepare his disclosures to Congress. There's a very specific process to go through. Only certain committees in the House, it's the House Ways and Means Committee, has the authority to hear that special taxpayer information that is made private by the law. So we had to get approval from them. I had to get clearance to be able to even hear the extent of Gary's disclosures. First, we had to go to the committee and say, we need to represent him. We have a general idea, but we need this authorization. And then he came forward. And as he did, Joe Ziegler, seeing how the Justice Department responded by taking them off the case, by immediately retaliating against them, that pushed Joe also to blowing the whistle. So the public really had this come to light, in the end of the summer of 2023, the end of June 2023. DOJ, to try and get out ahead of it, announced a plea agreement for Hunter Biden. Just 2 days later, as expected, the Ways and Means Committee voted to release this blockbuster whistleblower information. And the rest has been in the public eye since. What the IRS whistleblowers released was instrumental in Judge Mary Ellen Noriega in Delaware rejecting the plea agreement, saying, I'm seeing a lot of this information here not accounted for in this plea agreement. It seems to grant more sweeping immunity than I'm allowed to. So she rejected that. And after DOJ really, kind of painting the whistleblowers as just disgruntled and making something up, certainly Hunter Biden's attorneys did that. Ultimately, DOJ charged with the exact same charges these guys recommended. Hunter Biden pled guilty and, of course, now has received a pardon dating all the way back to January 1st of 2014 for any criminal acts he has committed that we know, that he may have committed that we don't know about. The most sweeping pardon in American history. But again, we wouldn't have been in this situation were it not for the IRS whistleblowers, because otherwise Hunter Biden never would have been charged. This would have just died a quiet death at DOJ, and the public never would have been the wiser.
And it sounds like that was the intent, right? I mean, the whole time they were handcuffed, and the investigation was slow walked to allow the statute of limitations expire. What has been the reaction within the bureaucracy towards supervisory special agent Gary Shapley and special agent Joseph Ziegler? What have they faced since coming out publicly?
There's certainly been a lot of retaliation, and some of it has been, in ways that the law can try to address, and others have just been in subtle ways that the law can't really do anything about. So from the time that Gary Shapley first confronted U.S. Attorney David Weiss, that happened in October of 2022. And after that, Weiss suddenly realized that he had a problem on his hands. And so he started asking the IRS for all of Gary Shapley's emails and communications about the case, claiming it was for discovery. Usually a supervisor's communications would not be provided to DOJ as part of discovery because they're not going to be a witness in any trial ultimately. So right from that fall and winter of 2022, David Weiss was really leaning on the IRS. And in December of that year, Gary Shapley applied for a position for which he was the clear favorite. He helped stand up this international tax group where we cooperate with 5 other nations, and that J5, as they call it, helps to encourage tax compliance in all these countries. So those tax investigations, because Gary leads the crack team on that. Joe is a member of that crack team, the A team, when it comes to international tax investigations. So Gary should have been a shoo-in for the position. But after David Weiss is really leaning on the IRS saying this guy's a problem, he gets passed over for that promotion. They secretly decide to take him off the case at Weiss's urging, even though they didn't tell the whistleblowers about it until May, after they had come forward. Although, Gary and Joe, I think we'll ask the question was, did they really decide then or did they decide later when it was public? But either way, it's bad, right? Either way, it was retaliation for them, raising concerns about these things. And so to this day, he's been passed over for multiple promotions. Gary has. Both he and Joe are just treated differently, right? No one, just in subtle ways, right? They again used to be high rising in their careers, and now they're just kind of small blocks put at every step for their cases. Some of their key cases, the IRS basically told them to shut down, which is, really ironic given how much this administration is focused on getting tax compliance from, high worth individuals. But they said, no, no, no. In this case, at one point, this is one of their cases they were told is the future of IRS criminal investigations. Then after they came forward, they said, well, actually, we think we're not going to do this case anymore, leaving one U.S. attorney's office in a different part of the country to say, what happened? We were already on this case. We think it's a great case. So these are just a number of the ways that the government has retaliated. And of course, Abby Lowell and Hunter Biden have retaliated as well by claiming these guys broke the law. They filed a lawsuit against the IRS. And the whole crux of the lawsuit was that the two IRS whistleblowers and also myself and my co-counsel, Mark Lytle, that we violated those taxpayer secrecy laws. We were extremely careful in coming forward. And that's the whole reason Gary got counsel. Same with Joe Ziegler, who has separate counsel. And so we are now helping to represent both of them in a defamation lawsuit against Abby Lowell, Hunter Biden's attorney. We wouldn't be in this situation. Again, Hunter Biden is now out of legal peril. He's been pardoned, but he's still creating problems for these guys by, having this lawsuit against the IRS and claiming they broke the law. And even with a change in administration, even if there are different folks in the White House, different folks in DOJ, this case is now in front of a judge. We think eventually they will be vindicated, but again, it will take quite some time to go through all of that. Again, we are trying to provide the legal counsel for them, but this is an expensive process, and they're not even able to speak up in that case because the suit is against the IRS. Even though it's claiming that they broke the law, the IRS is the one supposed to defend them. DOJ is supposed to defend them. DOJ from the outset, that's who they blew the whistle on. Same with the IRS. And early on, DOJ didn't file any motion to dismiss like you normally would. So they've really kind of taken a dive to some extent early on in that case. And even down the line now, a new DOJ staffing can come in and argue, this never, clearly they didn't break the law, but this should have been dismissed way back at the outset of the case, and DOJ didn't even move to do that. So that's part of why we filed the defamation lawsuit against Abby Lowell, is to give these guys a voice somewhere so that they can make the arguments that they're not allowed to make. We tried to intervene in that other case, and the judge did not allow us to do so. So that's part of why we have this focus in this other case. These guys deserve to have their reputations defended, and defendwhistleblowers.com is a place that we are raising money to do that, because we can't. I'm not a defamation lawyer. Again, we know the retaliation law. We know going to Congress. But this is an area where that retaliation is extended because the Bidens are such a high-profile family. The attacks against these guys have expanded well beyond what you normally see with whistleblower retaliation, to where probably half the country thinks these guys broke the law, and that's just wrong. They did not do so, and so we really hope to vindicate them with this defamation lawsuit.
Yeah, and I think this is why Empower Oversight is so important, because it's not just about these two IRS agents. It's about all bureaucrats that see abuses of power, and then they have to wonder, if I speak out, is my life and livelihood going to be destroyed, right? Because we see the same thing with the FBI. We see whistleblowers that came out against the FBI, their lives were destroyed. And it's really a shame when you have, like, Hunter Biden and all that he's done, crack, hookers, making tons of money off the backs of taxpayers, kicking up to the big guy and everything. And then you have two legitimate people that are doing the right thing, that are actually doing public service, are the ones that are demonized as the bad guy. What kind of message does it send, and how much institutional damage is done when you have the IRS or the FBI sit there and retaliate against whistleblowers who are doing the right thing?
Yeah, it's significant. And a lot of people are watching to see what happens. So we've also represented a number of these, kind of the main FBI whistleblowers people have heard of. I testified alongside Marcus Allen, Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, together with them. And then Marcus and I testified again earlier this fall. And they've had similar things there where, newspapers, we got a newspaper to retract false statements about Marcus Allen. But again, when you go up against a family as big as the Bidens, it also emboldens those within these agencies and it emboldens others. And so that allowing this retaliation to go on, again, not just in the agency, but also from the Bidens themselves to go unchallenged, I think really does scare future whistleblowers from coming forward. They say, why would I do this? Why would I put my, stick my neck out and put my career on the line? And so that's what we hope to really vindicate, is not just these two individuals, but all future potential whistleblowers who can help. That's how you drain the swamp. That's how you identify the problems in the government, right? Is through these people on the inside who, again, many of them are very dedicated civil servants, public servants who went to work for the government because they want to do good, right? And law enforcement, so many of our federal law enforcement officers are good, salt of the earth people who are there to help protect America, who swore an oath to the Constitution and absolutely believe in that. But they're battling with a lot of other folks in their bureaucracies who don't, right? Who just abuse their positions. And so we need to support the good guys and supporting whistleblower protections, fighting against retaliation. And again, in this case, even fighting against the defamation against Gary and Joe and others like them is how you do that. And that fund that we established at defendwhistleblowers.com, it's just a Give, Send, Go page. If you're familiar with them, kind of a faith-based alternative to GoFundMe. This is about that, not just for these guys, but for future whistleblowers who are defamed, so that whistleblowers will know that it's not just the legal remedies and the law that say, okay, well, you're not going to be fired necessarily, but also, this is a way we can try and make sure that their reputations are also protected.
Yeah, and I think it's really important what you're doing because you want people to speak up. Transparency is the only way that you bring accountability to the system and actually begin to clean it out. So, last question for you. What are your hopes with the incoming administration as far as the bureaucracy goes and accountability? Not policy per se, but as far as what do you hope they do to try and rein in the out of control bureaucracy?
Those are really good questions, and a lot of discussion has been had as to how you best go about it, right? But as an initial matter, I think a very important first step is for individuals in these agencies to ensure that the retaliation is undone. So, for instance, some of our FBI whistleblowers, their clearances should be reinstated. People that you've heard of, like Garrett O'Boyle, people you might not have heard of, like Mike Zummer, who works with Empower Oversight. These are people whose clearances were wrongly suspended or revoked for just doing the right thing, which is what we want them to do as taxpayers. So, Kash Patel, if he is able to head the FBI, he can restore clearances. Same with whoever heads the IRS, other agencies that we have worked with whistleblowers in. I think beyond that, going to find the people inside the agency who know where the problems are is what I would recommend. Go to the whistleblowers, go to the people who are still there, right, and say, hey, I'm open to hear these things, these problems. I think one of the challenges that people have, that I noticed when I worked on the Hill, was people coming in to take over an agency felt this ownership for everything that had happened there, right? And so suddenly, if during a Trump administration, a whistleblower comes and suddenly a cabinet secretary says, oh no, we got to shut this person up, and you say, well, they're the ones that are going to help you find this, right? And so trying to encourage incoming people, look, you're not responsible necessarily for what happens 5 levels underneath you in this agency. Listen to those people and use them to help you root out the problems. So I hope an incoming administration will do that. I hope that they will listen to the whistleblowers, find the problems, and try and address those, even if sometimes it's hard to fix those problems. And it can be hard to hear criticisms of your own activity. I led a couple of agencies during the first Trump administration, 2 independent agencies, but those were places where there had been problems in the past also. Just being able to say, hey, I'm willing to make these changes, even if it involves doing things differently than how we do now. I think people appreciate that, and that encourages an environment where people are willing to come forward. But they have to, you have to, as a manager, be willing to have that because, again, they're there for the taxpayers. As you said at the outset, the agencies aren't there just to be supported off the backs of the public. They're there to serve the public. And to do that, they have to be able to find where the problems are and fix them.
Absolutely. And hopefully it starts getting cleaned up. So everyone needs to check out Empower Oversight. I'll have the links up at the P.A.S. report. I encourage everyone to help out the special agent, Gary Shapley, and Joseph Ziegler. Help them out going through a difficult time being attacked. We'll have the link up to the Give, Send, Go as well. Tristan, pleasure to talk to you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me, Nick.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, Visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at PAS Report.